to reparations. Okay? So he made an excellent post as it relates to the, hey Jackie, how you doing? Oh yeah, how you doing? He made an excellent post about and how as it relates to reparations. And he made 11 points to why reparations ought to be paid. And I couldn't have said it better myself. So I'm going to give credit to Brother Tariq Nasheed who did this, but I agree with everything he said so far. So this Black Fact is going to deal with 11 points of why reparations are important. The first one is, I never owned slaves, so I'm not responsible. We hear this all the time from white people, right? Especially when the conversation comes about reparations. I never owned slaves, so I'm not responsible. Here's the answer to that. Slavery was sanctioned by the federal government, and all those under the government profited from free black labor. So the same government and its subjects owe black people for the free labor that accumulated all the wealth today. Y'all get that, right? So when white folks say, well, I didn't own any slaves. I wasn't back in that time. You still benefited from it. And you still benefit from that free labor today. In fact, the reason the United States is such a power is because of that free labor that they got for 250 years. Okay? Number two, I'm Irish, so am I owed reparations? Now, we've heard this argument that Irish people were slaves too. Let me just say this without biting my tongue. That's a damn lie. Okay? When white people came to America, they were indentured servants. You all know what indentured servants are, right? That means that you contract with someone in the new world. You come from the old world, and your contract states that you must work for that person for 7 years. Okay? 7 years, and once you've completed those 7 years, you are free. Okay? So this lie that Irish were slaves, come on. All right? So here's what Tariq Nasheed said. Irish indentured servants already received two forms of reparations. One was freedom dues, money and land, okay? And the second was all the tangible benefits that came with the first affirmative action program called white supremacy. Y'all get that, right? Let me explain a little bit more. And I really respect Brother Nasheed for writing this, because this is the best thing I've seen thus far, the argument for. So first of all, he says, one was freedom dues, okay? So once you serve your indentured servitude, they gave you money and they gave you land. That, and I say they being the federal government, okay? Number two, and the second, was all the tangible benefits came from the first affirmative action program called white supremacy. So what he's saying there is that white people are benefiting from, they always complain that black people got a job here because of affirmative action. Well, white people have been getting jobs in America, free loans, cheap loans, or whatever the case may be, because they already had affirmative action built in. It was simply white affirmative action. And it still goes on today. Black people are still the last to be hired and the first to be fired. Okay? Number three. How would we determine who is qualified for reparations? Simple. Foundational black Americans can trace a direct ancestor to slavery. This is relatively easy. If your ancestor was enslaved, most likely you will find them or their descendants on the 1870 census. Now, I differ with him on this, because many slaves were not on that census. All right? So to just simply use that document is not an accurate document to determine who will and who will not get reparations. You're going to need something more than the 1870 census, because there were black people who were born in barns and they were never reported to the census. Okay? There were black people they weren't born in hospitals back then. All right? They were born in a farm. They were born out in a field. They were born in a barn. They were born in different places. So using that simple document, although it could be an aid, but it should not be the be-all to end all. Number 4, why am I responsible, I being white, why am I responsible for the sins of my white forefathers? Well, that's pretty easy. I explained that a few minutes ago, but here's what Brother Nasheed says. Your ancestors profited from their sins, and the profits of those sins were passed down generationally to you. And those profits have been racially locked into the dominant society away from the descendants of slaves. Now that clearly means that, we've been talking a lot of how whites have went into black communities and destroyed property, destroyed land. They took that land, okay? And they built, so for instance, the pastor that I talked about last week who had 270 acres, right now on that land, International Paper owns that land. So, and it's been passed through different hands over the last few decades. So white people benefited from the theft of that land. Even today, International Paper, an international company, is benefiting from owning that land which was stolen from a black minister and his family. So you've benefited from it. Even though you didn't participate, you currently benefit from it. Let me tell you another way, and I mentioned that a few minutes ago. Here's another way you white people benefit from what happened with your forefathers. Your loans are cheaper than my loans. See, I go into a bank and ask for a business loan where the interest rate might be 7, 8, 9%. He's going to charge me 11, 12, 13% because he looks at me as a black person as a high risk. Even though I'm not a high risk, just because I'm black, he looks at me at a high risk. Let me give you another example. Your neighborhood, and we talked about this 2 weeks ago, Ali Velchi did an excellent report on how banks devalue black neighborhoods. In other words, your house might be worth $500,000. But because of where your house is, the bank will say it's worth $250,000. Let me give you another how you benefit. Depending on my zip code, I pay a higher insurance premium than whites do. So let's stop this mess where you don't benefit from white supremacy. White people benefit from white supremacy every day. Okay? Number 5. How would we distribute payments for reparations? The same way you distributed payments to Native American tribes on a regular basis. Okay? This ain't hard. Y'all try to pretend like it's so hard. It ain't rocket science. You've already done this before, and you can do it now. This is not hard. Any excuse you come up with, that's why I love this, and that's why I reposted this. Because any excuse that you try to come up with to pretend that reparations are not in order, Brother Tariq Nasheed has shot it down. Okay? Number 6, what about immigrant groups who came over after slavery who were mistreated? They came here voluntarily, and they have zero to do with the debt that's owed to black Americans. Immigrant groups came here to enjoy the wealth that was already generated from free black labor. You know, I was telling someone the other day And I say this often. I'm done carrying water for anybody but black people. The name of this show is Black Focus. It's not multicultural focus. It's not gay focus. It's not Hispanic focus. It's not Arab focus or white focus or any other focus. It is black focus. Because this show is designed to focus on the issues relating to who? Black people. And quite often I've said on this show that immigrants don't understand the pain that was paid for them to be able to come to America. Let me say that again. Immigrants do not understand the pain that black people paid for them to be able to have civil rights. This is why I tell you that I don't support gay rights, because if you are a human being, you ought to be supporting human rights. I support you as a human, not as a gay person. Now, if you want to section yourself off, that's more than welcome. You can do that. I have no problem with that. But as a human being, you as a gay person deserve rights as a human being, not as a separate individual. So I don't carry water for anybody else, because most of those people that are clamoring for rights now, those rights were built on the backs of black people. So you ought to be bowing down to black people. But unfortunately, when we go into immigrant stores, they treat us with disrespect, not understanding that the reason you have that store is because of black people. In fact, black people died. Black people were hung so that you could have your immigrant store in that black neighborhood. Okay? So they don't deserve any reparations. As he said, they came here voluntarily. Those people at the border, as horrific as that is, and we're going to talk about that a little bit today, those people at the border decided that, hey, where I live, I don't want to live here anymore. I want to go to America. So they packed up their little belongings or whatever they needed, and they started the trek to America. They decided. No one said, hey, we're going to go get those immigrants in Mexico and bring them to America. We're going to go get those Arab immigrants and bring them to America. We're going to go get those Japanese immigrants and bring them to America. No one did that. But you know what they did to black folks? You know what they did to my ancestors? They decided that we need to build America, so we're going to go steal human cargo. And that's what they did. That was involuntary as opposed to voluntary. And the fact that my ancestors were involuntarily enslaved, they didn't say, hey, that place America that they building, let's go over there and be slaves. Yeah, let's all go to America and be slaves, and let's bring our women and let them rape our women. And let's bring our girls and let them rape our girls. And let's bring our boys and let them rape our boys. Let's let them kill our men. Yeah, let's volunteer to do that. Yeah, that doesn't make any sense, does it? No, it doesn't. So immigrants don't deserve any reparations whatsoever. Number 7, there are no slaves alive today. Okay? That's number 7. In order to justify American slavery, a culture of vile anti-black racism was created and placed in all areas of activity. That systematic culture has been passed down today, and it has magnified into genocidal proportions at this point. In other words, he's talking about the black codes. In fact, he's talking about the 13th Amendment too. Because, when they passed the 13th Amendment, they put a little joiner in there that says, unless you're convicted of a crime, then we can enslave you. And then they went on to pass vagrancy laws and loitering laws that if a black man was walking down the street, he was considered loitering, and they would arrest him and send him to jail back to slavery, even though the 13th Amendment was there. Okay? But more importantly, they put in the black codes. I talked the other day about the grandfather clauses. So in other words, once slaves were freed and they were ready to go vote, many places they would go get ready to vote. And they said, oh, you can't vote unless you can read this scripture. Well, slaves were never taught to read. You can't vote unless your grandfather voted. Well, we know that no slaves, ex-slaves' grandfathers ever voted in any election. You can't vote unless you can count and tell me how many marbles are in this jar. Well, I'm an ex-slave. You didn't teach me to read, and you certainly didn't teach me to count. So those types of things were put into place to continue to perpetuate the peculiar institution of slavery. And when I say peculiar, I'm saying that no other place in the world was slavery like it was in America. Okay? So then you, what did you do? Then you launched the Ku Klux Klan. And they would run and terrorize black families and run them off their land so that you could then steal it. Then you had Jim Crow, where you had black water fountains and white water fountains, black bathrooms and white bathrooms. If you remember yesterday, we learned something yesterday about Sam Cooke, and a change is going to come. Because I didn't know that the reason that song was written, was because Sam Cooke and his entourage in 1964 was in Shreveport, Louisiana, and he couldn't stay at a Holiday Inn. He had to go to the Black Hotel. Okay? So, you benefited from it. And not only did you benefit from it, you continue to pass laws even today. Your laws are specifically designed to arrest young black males and put them in prison so they can give you free labor. So, don't give me that. There are no slaves alive today. Number 8, slavery was so long ago. Why are we worrying about ancient history? One of the last black American slaves who has verifiable documents that he was sold to a plantation owner before the Civil War was a man named Sylvester Maggie, who died in 1971. Y'all get that? One of the last black American slaves died in 1971. So even if they weren't enslaved, black people still suffered under Jim Crow. My mom, and she'd probably get mad at me if I told you her age, but thank goodness she's not listening. I'm going to tell you her age right now. Okay? So it's 2019. Okay? My mom is 93 years old. So my mom was born in 1926. September 16th, 1926, Evelyn Coleman was born. Do you think she suffered under Jim Crow? Do you think she suffered under the black codes? Do you think she suffered during the 60s? I remember we were living at 4000 Malloy, or 4000 Malloy, when Dr. King was killed in 1968. And I remember sitting on the side of her bed the night that he was killed. We were listening to the radio as the radio was offering the updates on what had occurred. And I remember as plain as day, and I was in 68, I was about, I was 7 years old. And I remember sitting on the side of the bed with her and tears rolling down her eyes when the news came over the radio that Dr. King had been killed. And what she said to me is, I can't believe they killed that great man. So my mom has lived through literally all of that. So when you try to make the justification that there aren't any slaves living today, You're probably right about that, but their children are, and there were many of them who suffered under the auspices, the evil auspices of Jim Crow. And my mother was one of them. In fact, I was born in 1961. I too suffered under the evil auspices of Jim Crow, but I was too young to even know it. I just knew there were certain things that I wasn't supposed to do. But I then, like I am now, at 6 years old, was pretty straightforward and would ask quite often. I remember my aunt saying, Dave, just be quiet, okay? Don't say nothing. At 6 years old, she, don't go in here and get us in trouble, Dave. Aunt Maggie, God rest her soul. All right, number 9. We've got 2 more to go, 3 more to go. Number 9. Why should my tax dollars pay for something I didn't do? Now, when I'm saying I, these are white people talking. I didn't put Japanese people in internment camps, but my tax dollars went to paying them. I didn't destroy the World Trade Center, but my tax dollars went to pay 911 victims, so tax dollars should be used to compensate us. Now, that's pretty straightforward, okay? There's a lot of things that we pay. I mean, you know, Barack Obama, he set up payment for Jewish Holocaust survivors and some of their descendants. Well, you know, I could use that argument. Well, you know, I hadn't killed one Jew. I haven't gassed one Jew. I haven't put any Jews in concentration camps. But American tax dollars are supporting Jews. So that argument is stupid too. Okay. Number 10. The Civil War was reparations. Northern whites started randomly killing black people, the draft riots, when the Civil War was announced. And Union soldiers killed thousands of black people after the Civil War in a concentration camp in Natchez, Mississippi. Do y'all remember that concentration camp that I talked about the other day? Yes. What was it called? The Devil's Punch Bowl. Okay? So we need 3 more payments. So the point that Brother Tariq Nasheed is making is this, is that, and the argument that I was making to my friend Iverson Jackson, who's the black Republican minister, is that those Union troops who were Republicans, and those Republicans in the North, were killing black people. In fact, there has not been an accurate number of the number of people that died at the Devil's Punch Bowl. Remember, the Union soldiers said when they died, they just gave them a shovel and told you to bury them where they died. And no one has even went into Natchez, Mississippi and excavated that site, and they shouldn't. Remember, we talked about the peaches that grows in the peach grove in the Devil's Punch Bowl, that grow so big and so huge, but the locals will not eat them because they know that those peaches are fertilized with the blood, sweat, and tears of black people. So here we are again. Brother Tariq Nasheed is referencing the Devil's Punch Bowl. If you don't know about the Devil's Punch Bowl, shame on you. You know now. Go read up on it. It was horrific. It was horrific. See, that was America's first concentration camp. They have more concentration camps now on the border, but the first concentration camp was the Devil's Punch Bowl. So Brother Nasheed makes an excellent point. Number 11, and this is the last one. Reparations talk will make white people uncomfortable. Well, before I read what he says, let me say something to you all, okay? I don't live my life worrying about what white people feel about me. In fact, I don't live my life worrying about what anybody says about me, but specifically white people. And when it comes to talking about race, I don't give a damn if they do get uncomfortable. That's part of the problem. That's part of the reason that this problem has persisted, is because we have decided that, let's not talk about that. Let's not talk about the women that were raped and murdered. Let's not talk about the towns that were burned to the ground. Let's not talk about the property that was stolen from black people that white people now benefit from. See, they would be just as happy that we don't talk about it. If you go out and look at that documentary, Banished, you'll notice that a lot of those white folks don't talk about it. But I remember part of that when they were talking about, they had some white women, some old white women who knew that they had benefited from white supremacy. They wouldn't talk about it, but they joke about it. And even one of the white women, the old white women, mentioned the fact that there wasn't many niggas around there. Hello? So making them uncomfortable, I don't care if you get uncomfortable. I just need my check. So here's number 11. Guess what else is uncomfortable? Slavery, Jim Crow, lynching, gentrification, racial mass incarceration, state-sanctioned police and white vigilante murders. So our conversation isn't contingent upon your feelings. Hello? I applaud you, Brother Nasheed. You all want to go out, that's posted on my wall. From this point on, those 11 questions will answer any question white people have about reparations. Any reservation that they may have. It succinctly and precisely explains why reparations must be given. I like that. And I want to thank Brother Tariq Nasheed. In fact, we need to get him as a guest. Okay? He has a Twitter account, Tariq Nasheed. Okay? Here's his name right here so you can get the correct spelling. And tomorrow when we get in, we'll do guest. We'll start going out after guest, okay? And we'll use my phone and my Black Focus email and so on and so forth to do that, all right? Because we want to talk to him about this. This is the best explanation I've seen. Now, I've heard them. Of course, I know them. But many of you all are not as learned as myself or others. So when you are talking to your white friends, because you need to talk to your white friends about reparations, they're going to ask one of these 11 questions. I know they are. All you got to do is pop out your little Twitter, and read it to them. Okay? And those are our Black Facts for today.
Keep listening to Black Focus Radio for more
I like that.
Black Facts, our culture, our history, our people on joynetradio.com.
And don't forget, you can sponsor Dynamic Black Facts. Just give me a call at 615-554-0568. And I'll hook you up with a nice advertising package. Well, there's one of my old buddies, Effie Maddox, from college days. Hey, Miss Effie, how you doing? Thanks for joining the show. But again, you can go out to my wall right now, and those questions about reparations and why they need to be posted, why we should get reparations, they're pretty clear, straightforward, and to the point. I agree with most of all of them. In fact, I agree with all of them, to be totally honest. One, I have some reservations about the 1870 census, because many black people were not on the census at that time. Okay? In fact, that was right after the Civil War. Many black people were still running from Confederate and Union soldiers and were afraid. I mean, just like now. Typically, black people don't, they do better, but typically black people don't sign the census because they don't trust the government. And that started post the Civil War. Okay? All right. So, we got a lot of other stuff to talk about. Don't know what we're going to talk about, but we got a lot of other stuff to talk about. You're listening to Black Focus Radio, our issues, our solutions, our voices. I was going to say our rejoices. I ain't in church, but our voices. I want to appreciate everybody that's joining the show today. I just wanted to throw that out there about Brother Tariq Nasheed. And if you have not, and let me make sure I've got that posted on my wall, just in case. Yeah, it's posted on my wall. Right now, it's the third item down. Now, you all know that I post a lot of stuff. So if you don't get out there and get it, it'll be way down the list here probably by 3 o'clock this afternoon, or probably about 4 o'clock this afternoon. Because as soon as I get off the show, I start prepping for tomorrow's show. By the way, speaking of tomorrow's show, we have the great Dr. Rosie Milligan on the show for the first hour. We're going to talk about black male-female relationships. Hello. Let me say that again. We're going to talk about black male-female relationships. No, we ain't talking about gay relationships. We're talking about black male-female relationships and how we can make them better, how we can work together as a team, because black people used to be a team. Now they run for themselves. They do for themselves. So we're going to talk about how we got here. Okay? We're going to talk about the psychology of putting the mind of a man, of a black man, into a black woman. How did that happen? How did that reverse order happen? Whereas that black women are dominant and black men are subservient. Why did that happen? Were black men born that way, or were they conditioned to be that way? We're going to talk about all that. Tomorrow is going to be a dynamic show. You don't want to miss this show, tomorrow's show with Dr. Rosie Milligan. We're going to get deep. We're going to break down the Willie Lynch letter. We're going to talk about that. Because it was Dr. Rosie Milligan who, when I first bought the book, Nigger Please, we had heard about Willie Lynch. I knew about Willie Lynch. Many people had told me about Willie Lynch, but I had never seen the philosophy until I read Nigger Please. And Dr. Milligan quoted the entire letter. And I've got it written somewhere, and I'm going to dig it out. Because one day I'm going to read it on the station. It's a tough read. It's a tough hear. And there are people out there, oh, well, you know, Willie Lynch never existed. Nah, we don't know that to be true. But what we do know, when you read that letter, what he says in that letter is happening today. Because one of the things he said in that letter, Willie Lynch said, because he was trying to teach Southern plantation owners how to control their slaves. And he used a form of indoctrination. And what we realize is, and what he said, that if you do this correctly, in other words, if you beat the hell out of your slaves correctly, if you take the biggest and the baddest black one, the toughest one on the plantation, and you tie him between two horses, and then you slap the horses on the butt and have the horses to run in opposite directions, and by the way, you line up every slave on the plantation to watch this spectacle, including his birth mother, and you split him apart. You rip his limbs off. What that will psychologically do is the next time a male slave starts talking noise, his mother will automatically tell him to sit down and be quiet. Woo! That happens today, doesn't it? See, we tell the story of how mothers raise their daughters, but they love their sons. Now, what do I mean by that? Most black mothers today, because they understand how black men have been treated through history, they sometimes coddle their sons. They don't give their sons all the things their sons need to be successful. For example, I'm willing to bet you if I put Demaya on the air right now, she's 17 years old. If I put her on air right now, she could tell me all the things that her mother has taught her about being a young lady and being successful. Okay? Which is great. So typically what mothers will do is they'll teach the girl how to cook. They'll teach her how to wash clothes, mop a floor. Teach her, typically you find that most of the time, girls are smarter than boys because they tell them, hey, you got to go to school. You got to get an education. But mothers typically let their boys grow up like wild weeds. Demaya's shaking her head. Yes. That boy is not getting any discipline. He does basically what he wants. The only thing that he really does, the only discipline that he may get is if he plays sports. So this morning, I was out about 6 a.m. and I was in a particular neighborhood. And I drove up the street, and from a distance, I could see a group of people. And I thought maybe that those people were simply going to work or getting ready to go to work. As I got close to them and drove past them, it was about 10 young black males. At 6 o'clock in the morning, I don't know this to be sure, but they looked like gang members. 6 o'clock this morning, no shirts on, pants down around their waist or their butts. And as I drove by them, somebody flashed a sign at me and screamed at my car. Those are the black males I'm talking about that mama didn't raise. Mama just said, hey, you just go be a black male. And the reason that's done, and what we're going to talk about tomorrow with Dr. Rosie Milligan, is that mama knows that the black male, her black son, has a lot of pressure on him. So I'm not going to put any pressure on him in this house. I made the argument last week on The Devil's Advocate that most of the time, black women are raising black males. And you would tend to believe, because when you hear black women say, well, you know, there aren't any good black males out here, well, that's an indictment on black women. Now, I disagree with that because there are plenty of black males out here and plenty who have been raised by single mothers. But there are a lot of black males who are raised by single mothers where that single mother doesn't put any pressure on him at all. He a boy, he'll learn it on his own. That's what Willie Lynch was talking about. So we're going to delve deeply tomorrow. And how did we get here? How did black male-female relationships get here? Okay? Because see, I would tell those mothers, I'd say, you say, well, there aren't any good black males out here, but then you raise a black male. You would tend to believe, and I don't understand this, because with so many black women raising black males, you would tend to believe that black males would be top of the line. Because that black woman will be telling him, this is how you treat a woman. Okay? This is how I want to be treated. This is how you treat. But apparently, they're not. So if you're saying that there aren't any black males, good black males out here, well, wait a minute. The majority of the black males being raised are being raised by black females. So there's a disconnect here. What's going on that black male is not getting what he needs from the black female to be a successful black man? We know what's going on, the black father. We're going to trace back to why the black father, because wanders off or disappears. Because that's what the slave owner wanted. All the black man was. You remember I read the piece yesterday where slave owners expected a black male of childbearing age to sire 200 children. Hello? Notice I said sire. I didn't say father. I said sire. That means that you deliver a sperm, boom. She pregnant, you gone. So what's going on in the black community today can be directly traced to slavery, because it was white people who told black fathers that you don't have to be a father. Never taught them how to be a father. I agree with you, LaTanya. Women cannot raise a man without the help of another man. Let me expound on that point for just a moment. My mother was a single mother. Well, she is a single mother today. She's still a single mother. I grew up without my father. But how did I become such a positive black male? I could have been roaming the streets. I could have been banging and slanging. I could have been having babies here, there, and everywhere and not taking care of them. Remember, I went and fought an entire state so I could take care of my son. The state told me that I couldn't take care of my son. All they wanted me to do is show up and pay child support. I fought an entire state to show them that not only can I pay child support, but I can raise my son. Okay? But my mother grew up where I grew up without a father. I don't know who my father is today. But because I am successful, and I'm going to give you 3 names, and there are many others. Benjamin Madry, Clifton Earl Towns Sr., and Samuel Hudson Sr. All 3 of those men were significant mentors in my life. They kept me on the straight and narrow. I even remember one time that my minister, back then, Reverend Nehemiah Mitchum, spanked my butt in church. I remember Mr. Talley, Mrs. Odessa Talley's husband, chastising me for making wrong decisions. There were men all around me, and it wasn't anything for my mom to say, I'm going to send you to Mr. Talley, or I'm going to send you to Reverend Mitchum and let you talk to him. I'm going to send you to Mr. Hudson or Mr. Towns or Mr. Madry or whomever that deacon was at the church. See, part of the problem today is that we can't send our children to anyone because we don't want them to chastise our children, because it might hurt their feelings. They might start crying. He might have been too hard on little Johnny. Hello? As LaTanya said, a woman cannot raise a man to be a man. You can give him pointers. I tell the story all the time, and when we talk, and we're going to be talking to Dr. Kunjufu again. In his book, The Conspiracy to Destroy Black Boys, he tells the story of when he went into the home to visit a mother who was raising sons. He found out that the mother was teaching him how to sit down and pee like a woman. Hello? She didn't realize that she was reinforcing female traits into her son. She would also allow him to sit in front of her while she's doing her makeup in the mirror. See, I'm a little different from y'all because, see, I don't agree that all of these people who are all of a sudden gay were born that way, especially some of these males. I think some of it came from the fact of where they grew up and how they grew up, because we know for a fact children live what they learn. So if they're only around females, if they only see females primping in the mirror, putting on makeup, talking bad about black men. Think about this. You have a black son, and you're talking bad about black men around your 3, 4, 5, 6. As he gets older, you're continually saying black men aren't any damn good. I'm going to marry me a white man. I'm going to get me a white boy. How do you think that black son feels? Because he knows that he's going to grow up to be a black man. And if mama feels like a black man is no good, then maybe I, as little Johnny, don't want to grow up and be a black man. So I began to change who I am. Maybe if I can act like a woman, dress like a woman, then that'll be okay. Now, let me be clear on this, because I know some of you all are going to take this and say, oh, God, see, that Dave Coleman, he's homophobic. Nah, not homophobic. My eldest brother was gay. I said was because he's passed on now. This was back in the 60s, folks. Here's the other thing that I found out about a lot of gay people, is that they were previously sexually abused. That's not being born that way. So no, I'm not homophobic. I'm simply saying that conditions has led to some people being homosexual or lesbian. Conditions, not birth. Now, whatever they want to identify themselves as, that's fine with me. The only thing I'm concerned about is men saying I'm a woman, and then going and competing against women. We talked about this on the Weekly Sports Magazine. If you are born a man, you don't have the right to go then compete against women, because you are physiologically bigger, stronger, faster than a woman. (855-525-5683). So tomorrow we're going to talk about all of that stuff. We're going to talk about all of it. Dr. Rosie Milligan is going to be with us for the entire hour, and she's going to lay down the law with y'all. This is what y'all need to hear. See, this is part of the reason. And by the way, on July 10th, we're going to have again Dr. Claude Anderson on the air. We dropping knowledge here on Black Focus Radio. Because the only way that we're going to break this cycle is that we got to understand that we're in a cycle. We got to understand that there are problems going on with us. We got to understand that. So we're going to break all of these cycles. How do we get to this point? How do we understand this? I agree with you, Kelly. I see your post. How do we get to this point? How did black men get to the point where they don't want to take responsibility? How do we get here? It directly relates to slavery. It directly relates to how black men were treated as slaves. And it directly relates to how black men are raised today by black women. Now, I'm not criticizing black women. You're doing the best that you can. There have been some black women. Look, my mom raised me as a single mother. She did a fantastic job, I think. I think I would have been a little better off had I had a man, a regular man in my life, but that's another story. But my mother did a fantastic job raising me. And there are black women out there who are doing great jobs raising black men. But at the end of the day, if we're going to fix the problem, we got to first know where it came from. And Dr. Rosie Milligan tomorrow is going to address that at 12 o'clock. 855-525-5683 is the number. That's how you get in touch with me. When we come back, we're going to get into some more of the stories that we want to talk about today. But please go out and read the post by Tariq Nasheed about why reparations are owed and needed. And any argument that you have against it simply won't stand up to the test of time. You're listening to Black Focus Radio. I'm Dynamic Dave on joynetradio.com.
Mitchell Funeral Home welcomes all of Arkadelphia and Arkansas in Clark County since 1966. At Mitchell Funeral Home, they understand that the funeral is a celebration of a life and legacy, so the entire staff takes great pride in the caring, personal, and professional services they provide. Cremations, funeral planning, burial policy, life insurance, notary, and monument sales are just a few of the services they offer.
Hey, Kelly, I agree with you.
Mitchell Funeral Home.
I agree with you. But on my inexact scientific poll that I conducted, I talked to her because, like I said, homosexuality has been part of my family for literally all my life. My brother was 14 years older than me. Okay? My brother was 14 years older than me. All right? Once we were able to sit down and talk and I was old enough to begin to understand, he told me what happened to him. He had been sexually abused. He wasn't born that way. And every other person that I've talked to, whether gay or lesbian, not all, but the majority of them that I've talked to, because I openly have these conversations, I'm not afraid to talk about homosexuality. They say the same thing, that they had been abused. Now, I agree with you. Some people are born that way. I totally agree with you. But we cannot discount the fact of why some people end up that way. So no, those are not antiquated views. Those are just views from facts that I've discovered. All right? Now, if my views were antiquated, that would mean that I don't agree with homosexuality. That's not what I said. So let's make that clear. Okay? You're free to be whomever you want. That's your business. But I'm simply saying it's treating you as a human being is where I'm coming from. I don't care who you sleep with. I don't care what you do in your bedroom. But when you come out of your bedroom, I'm going to treat you as a person. I don't care what you do in your bedroom. That's just me. That's how I look at it. Okay? So I hope you understand that. LaTanya, I agree with you as well. And that was the point I was making about my mother. Is that, yeah, my mother was a primary caregiver. But there were men who were helping her. And I think what happens to black women today, you need to get ready for your spot. What happens to black women today, you got it on the phone? Okay. All right. Is that they believe that they don't need a man. And in doing so, they don't even incorporate a man in their lives.
The views and opinions expressed today on Black
Okay?
Focus Radio are not the views and opinions of the station, its management, or its advertisers.
But my mother was a great mom.
To focus on our issues,
But
our solutions using
it was men who stepped in and helped her out.
Focus Radio.
Today, a lot of sisters don't want men to help them out. That's part of the problem. It's like me when I was raising my daughter, when she first came and went on her cycle for the first time. Hell, I don't know how to deal with that. I don't have them. I had to call her mom, say, hey, look, Sierra, I sent her to her mother. No, that's not what I'm saying, Kelly. Don't put words in my mouth. Okay? Get ready for you. All right, welcome back to the show. Welcome back to the show. I'm kind of having a conversation with people that are on the Facebook Live. I'll address your comment here in just a moment, Kelly. But before that, we need to do our Black Focus News.
Good afternoon. My name is Jeremiah Ivy with today's Black Focus headline news. In today's headlines, a father and his 3-year-old daughter were found dead after attempting to cross the Rio Grande. Okay. After attempting to cross the Rio Grande River. The picture has sparked even more outrage with the Trump administration's policy on immigration. In other news, some Arkansas Republican state lawmakers are making it harder for citizens to create ballot initiatives. Apparently, Republican lawmakers are only want your vote and not your voice. Last but not least, how much is that airplane seat in the window? Apparently, no amount of money could buy it. NFL star Cam Newton wanted to swap seats and offered 2 people $1,500. They turned him down. Must be nice. That's today's Black Focus headline news. Now it's time to get focused with more Black Focus Radio.
And thank you very much, Miss Jemiah Ivy, our intern, one of our interns that are here that's in here with us today. Let me quickly address a couple of things before I move on, and I want to talk to you, Kelly, specifically. Part of the reason that you can't have a good conversation with people who are gay or lesbian is because they simply don't listen. Okay? Now, I don't know what your sexual persuasion is, but clearly you're not listening to what I said. Okay? I did not say that every person that's gay or homosexual, that's gay or lesbian, was abused. That's not what I said. I simply said that the ones that I know, the majority of the ones that I know that I've spoken with in depth about their sexuality, they were sexually abused previously. Now, it's not scientific, but I'm simply, and I've had this conversation down through the years because, as I said, back in the 60s, my brother graduated in 1967. Hello? 1967. So from 67 to the present until he died 5 years ago. And by the way, moved to San Francisco in 1969. Okay? So we've been dealing with homosexuality in our family all my life. And the conversation that I had with him and many others, their homosexuality emanated from them being sexually abused. Because typically what girls do, they dress down. They don't want to look attractive to that man or woman who's abusing them. Same for the boy. Now, that's not everybody, because I know there are people, look, the one thing that we know about nature does different things. And it's ludicrous to think that there aren't people who are born that way. Caster Semenya, who is an international track star from South Africa, who runs the 800 meters, was a woman born with high testosterone. Okay? She was born a woman. She just happens to have male traits. So she should be able to compete with women. But a man, born a man, who is physiologically stronger, faster, bigger than a woman, and even though he identifies and says, hey, look, I've had an epiphany, although I was born a man, I'm really a woman. I don't have no problem with you doing that, dog. That's on you. Whatever you want to identify, if you want to identify as a snake, all more power to you, man. But if you're saying that you were born a man and you have all the physical traits as a man, and then you go and compete against women, that's wrong. I don't care how you look at it. That's wrong. We saw that this past spring when the young lady, which we'll call her, 2 years ago was a man and was on the track team of that particular college. He, at the time, competed as a man. Hello? He had all the physical characteristics of a man. All right? So he then decides that he was going to have change and he was going to compete as a woman. He wasn't winning when he was competing as a man. He then goes and competes against the women and he wins the national title, I believe, for the 800 meters against women. He still has all of his male muscles. He still has all of his male physiology. He just decided that he was a woman. Now, that's fine if he wants to do that. But there needs to be a line drawn. Okay? We can agree to disagree, Kelly, but, you know, it has nothing to do with abuse. Or it has nothing to do with being homophobic. It has everything to do with what's being right. And I don't care. I don't know many women who are as strong as men. Go back and read this. You can Google it. Go read the trans person who was a male in UFC. They allowed her to compete once they said that they were going to transition. They allowed her to compete against females, and he ends up cracking a woman's skull because he was bigger, well, she was bigger and stronger based on her previous sexuality. Okay? I'm done with that. All right? I'm just saying. 855-525-5683 is the number. That's how you get in touch with me. Last hour we spent talking about why reparations are needed. We're going to go through a few of other headlines today, this hour. One of them I want to talk about is bullying. Okay? New Jersey mom, 35, is beaten unconscious and left for dead by a school bully, 13, who was suspended from school when she complained about her son being told to go back to Mexico. So here was an Hispanic woman whose son was being bullied by a white guy, a white 13-year-old kid, something he probably learned from his dad or his mom. He beats this woman unconscious. Now, excuse me for being cold, but this young man needs to be in jail. I don't want to hear that mess. Well, oh, he's just a 13-year-old kid. He knew exactly what he was doing. He was taunting her son. When she stepped in, he then jumped her while she was with a baby and beat her unconscious. This young man needs to be in jail. If he was a black kid, he'd have been in jail. Okay? This is a horrific story. You know, I'm not understanding this bullying thing. Now, maybe because I was fortunate I wasn't bullied. And I'm pretty sure, and I know for a fact, there were kids my age growing up who were bullied. But I'm not understanding why parents and schools can't get their arms around this. It makes no sense to me. Because if a kid, I'm sure that kid has went to the teacher and said, hey, look, Bob keeps hitting me. Or Bob keeps tripping me. Or Bob did this. Or Bob did that. I'm sure that has happened. Why aren't the teachers stepping in? Back in my day when I was in school, if that teacher said, do it again, if you did it again, you were in hot water. Have we lost that type of discipline in our schools, in our homes, that if a parent says, don't touch that kid, let me hear of you touching that kid again? Fortunately, my kids didn't bully anybody, so I never had to have that conversation. But I know some parents whose kids did. And I know that parent who said, if I ever hear of you bullying anybody else, I'm going to show you what bullying is all about. that kid got that message. And if he didn't get that message, after mama or daddy or both got done with him, that was it for that bullying. So what is this bullying all of a sudden? Where it has gotten to epidemic proportions, where it seems out of control, where a 13-year-old kid would beat up a parent. At some point, you would have a delimiter in your mind and say, ooh, that's a grown person. I'm not going to touch them. Ooh, that's an adult. I'm not going to say anything smart to them. I'm not understanding this, man. I'm not getting it. Makes no sense at all. Hopefully we can get our arms around this. And let's look, there are too many kids. Man, look, when I was growing up, you never heard of a young person committing suicide. And I hate to be crass, but if it happened, it was usually a white kid. I'm just being real. When I was growing up, black kids didn't do that. Over the last couple of years, I've been seeing story after story of black kids, black girls, black boys, young black boys committing suicide because they're being bullied. If that child has gotten to the point where he wants to take his life, then somebody has dropped the ball. Is it the school district? Is it the parents? Remember the story of the brother last summer where his son was being bullied? And he decided to go and find the older kid who was bullying his son. And he went to confront him. Yeah, LaTanya, this child was 13 years old and he jumped on an adult who was trying to protect her son from him bullying that kid. But this black father went to this young man and began to ask him questions. Because here's the thing, typically when a kid is bullying another kid, there's something going on in that house. Now, in this particular case, the parents could have been teaching him racism. He told that kid to go back to Mexico. Don't know that to be true. There could be something else. That kid could be poor. Kid may not have a pair of shoes to change out of, or may have to wear the same clothes every day. We know for a fact that many kids drop out of school simply because they don't have the basic necessities. Kids are cruel. They make fun of you. We know that to be true. But this father decided that, hey, I'm going to go meet this boy, and then I'm going to go meet his parents. And come to find out that his mother, he was being raised by a single mother. This was a black kid. He was being raised by a single mother who had just lost her job. The boy wasn't eating. So he was acting out the loss to his family on another kid. That's sad. But you know what that father did? That father said, hey, come go with me. He took that boy on a shopping spree. He bought him some new clothes. He bought him some new shoes. He bought groceries so he could have something to eat. Now, the bully of his son and his son are now best of friends. Because that father looked beyond that young man's faults and saw his needs. Woo! That's powerful. And maybe that's what we ought to be doing with these bullies, because this has risen to epidemic proportions to a point where a 13-year-old kid will jump on a mother of a child when she's holding a baby. Now, if they're teaching him racism at home, there ain't nothing we can do about that. For him to be saying go back to Mexico, he's learning that from somewhere. I would argue that mama or daddy or both are probably espousing that viewpoint in front of him. That's why I say children live what they learn. That statement is more true than any that you can make. Children live what they learn. You know, the movie Trading Places exhibited that fact to us. Y'all remember that movie, Eddie Murphy and Dan Aykroyd? Eddie Murphy was a street thug, a hustler. Dan Aykroyd was a Wall Street investor, working for a big Wall Street company. His bosses decided to do an experiment and throw him out on his ear, the white guy, and get the black guy from the ghetto, bring him in, teach him the tricks of the trade. And sure enough, before you knew it, the black guy, Eddie Murphy, his name was Valentine, by the way, was trading just as good as the previous white guy. See, Valentine only knew what he had been reared to know in the neighborhood that which he grew up in. This is why I tell parents, you ought to send your children away. Send them to camp. Send them to another state. I tell adults, if you've been living in Little Rock all your life and you've never lived in another city, maybe it's time you get to see what the other world lives like. It makes a difference in how you view yourself. I'm going to say it again, and Jackie just posted it again. Children live what they learn, hear, and see. You doubt that? Let me give you another example. How many of y'all know a smoker? How many of y'all know their children who are now grown? How many of their children smoke? Probably not all of them, but I'm willing to bet you if you grew up in a household where your mom or your dad smoked, I'm willing to bet you that someone in your family, your brother or sister, smoked cigarettes. Children live what they learn. Hello? This ain't rocket science, folks. You know, that's why, I tell y'all the story about my children. If you gave any of them, if you went to either one, Akili or Sierra, and said, hey, I need to know some dirt on your dad. Who did he date when y'all were young? And if you can tell me, I'll give you $1 million. They look at you and probably say to the effect, and I can see both of them with their deadpan stares, well, that's $1 million that I won't be getting. Because they don't know who I dated when they were growing up. That was by design. Why? Because I didn't want my son to think that daddy can run women, and he grew up and run women. I didn't want my daughter to grow up and think, well, if daddy has multiple women, then it's okay for me to be one of those multiple women to another man. Now they're both grown, and both of them are tough as nails on potential boyfriends or girlfriends. They don't play. Again, children live what they learn. Let me give you another example, and I'm going to go to another story. Have you noticed that teachers' children are usually pretty smart? Have you noticed that teachers' children usually read quite well? Can do math? Why do you think that is? Did they get smart by osmosis? Did they get smart by simply being born and their parent was a teacher? Or did that parent create an atmosphere, a learning environment by which that child knew at an early age that education was important? I would argue the latter. Children live what they learn. And that supports the point that I was making before the top of the hour. Children live what they learn. 855-525-5683 is the number. That's how you get in touch with me. Let me make sure I'm covering everything in the T's today. Because someone says, Dave, sometimes you get on your rants and you forget to cover some things. Let me just make sure. Let's see. Okay. We're definitely going to talk about what's going on at the border here in just a moment. And let's see. Industrial bleach. Oh, yeah, we want to talk about that too. We've talked about the reparations. Let's quickly talk about this real fast. You know, you have to be careful of who you follow. Okay? You have to be careful, even though that they may claim that they are anointed. When they say, well, I'm anointed, you know what you should say? By whom? Because we get a lot of people, false prophets out there. So I ran across an interesting story, and I'm trying to get to it here. I ran across an interesting story, and it seems to me that white supremacy and white Jesus is really still pretty dominant in Africa. And we're seeing story after story. I saw a story the other day where this preacher took olive oil and rubbed it on a woman's private parts, on all the women in the church. Okay? And they thought that was okay. At what point do some woman in the church say, hey, dude, that ain't happening here? I also saw, we talked about this story the other day, where this white woman went into Africa, into Sudan, and decided that, hey, she was a doctor, and she set up her own hospital while these children were being transferred from the hospital. What is this fascination with Africa and whiteness? You see, I've told you all, we've seen that before. Y'all remember Jim Jones, don't you? You know, Jim Jones, who recruited people from America to go down to Central America and live in a commune, and he ended up poisoning 500-600 people, killing a congressman. What would make a person follow an idiot like that? Why would someone do that? I mean, I'm confused. So in this particular story, this particular white minister, let me just read it to you. He was in Uganda. You see, black people in America are not the only one that needs to be liberated mentally. There are places in Africa that are building giant statues of white Jesus. Huh? Don't you know that the Bible was about black people? Are there not any geologists or anthropologists that are in Africa that can tell you that? I know there are. I know, Tanya, you're right. So let me just read this. A white pastor gave 50,000 Ugandans industrial bleach and claimed it was a miracle water that could cure cancer and AIDS. So he went to the local store and bought some Clorox, some Purex, and then lied to these people and said, hey, this is some miracle water. You drink it and it'll cure whatever you have. In this case, AIDS and cancer. Here's the story. A disgraced American pastor has allegedly passed out a medical miracle drink composed of bleach to thousands of adults and children in Uganda. According to the Washington Post, and remember, he's already disgraced, so he decides, hey, I'm gonna take my ministry to Africa. This is what they do. We're also finding that there are many Catholic bishops, Catholic priests, evangelical priests who have went to places like Haiti, Dominican Republic, to Africa, and end up sexually abusing these kids. According to the Washington Post, Pastor Robert Baldwin and British missionary Sam Little promoted the fake bleach solution as a medical drink to at least 50,000 Ugandans through their charity. The cure-all, called Miracle Mineral Solution, was handed out by a cohort of religious leaders connected to Baldwin's ministry. Global Healing Christian Ministries was the name. Baldwin and Little even claimed the drug would cure cancer, malaria, and HIV. In a recent Fox report, the drug was also used as a cure for autism. I'm going to stop it right there. Now, how depraved do you have to be to lie to people and give them poison when they're already dying? By the way, the Food and Drug Administration officials have gone on record stating that the cure has no known health benefits. Miracle Mineral Solution is comprised of some of the same chemicals used in industrial bleach: sodium chloride and citric acid. Let me just tell y'all this. Y'all keep following that white Jesus, okay? Go right ahead. And y'all keep following those white ministers who are preaching the gospel. That reminds me of Paula White, who cut her teeth in black churches. Y'all know Paula White, Donald Trump's religious advisor now, who said that God told her to introduce her to Donald Trump. Oh, let me take that back. God told her to introduce him, God, to Donald Trump. So God spoke to Paula White and said, hey, look, you know that Trump guy? I need to meet him. Can you introduce me? You know, I'm a little shy. Yeah, I know I'm God. I created the world. You know, I created man out of clay. I saved the Israelites, the children of God. You know what I'm saying? I created the solar system. I'm God, but I'm a little nervous trying to meet Donald Trump. So I need you, Paula White, to introduce me to Donald Trump. Y'all need to be aware of these false prophets. And the only way that you can become aware of them is that you have to study accordingly for yourself. Stop sitting in these pews listening to these ministers and not questioning them. I'm just saying. 855-525-5683 is the number. Got a couple other things that we want to get to here today. Let's see here. Because the last few minutes we're going to talk about this horrific picture that is floating around the internet. GOP lawmakers here in Arkansas are trying to keep you from putting ballot initiatives on. That should tell you all I need to say about the GOP lawmakers. Because remember the last ballot initiative? This is where this came from. Let me tell you. The minimum wage bill. Remember that ballot initiative where people across the state of Arkansas voted for an increase of minimum wage to $15 an hour? And it was your Republican legislators who decided that, wait a minute, Arkansans don't need to be paid a minimum wage. Let's keep them poor and stupid. So they went in and undermined that legislation. So now what they're doing is say, so we can keep this from happening again, let's go in and put in some stopgap measures to make it tougher to launch an initiative by the people. Remember, I told you that Republicans are not for people. They're for corporations. Because those corporations pad their pockets. Just remember that. The video that was floating around about the cop who choked the teenager, he has now been fired. All of it was caught on camera. That's a good thing. Although he may be rehired simply because if it's a civil service job, he will have a right to a hearing. Now, that's one thing that needs to be solved. These people should not be getting hearings if they are violating certain laws. If you break the law, you shouldn't get a hearing for breaking the law. If you break break company policy, you should not be getting a hearing so you can get your job back. Okay? Federal news, judge sends the census lawsuit back to the lower court. In other words, Donald Trump, your question about what race you are on the 2020 census coming up is going to be wiped out. And what we're finding now is, see, one of the things that PLOTUS tried to do was stack the courts so that when he came up against certain things, the judge would rule in his favor. The only hope we have right now for America right now are the courts, because it's pretty clear that the Republican Party is not going to do anything against Donald Trump. You know, that saying, what Donald Trump said prior to him being elected, he could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue in New York and shoot and kill someone and nobody would mind. Well, certainly the Republicans won't mind. That's pretty clear. Let me make sure, because I'm going to spend the last hour talking about, Oregon governor signs bill granting states electoral votes to the national popular vote winner. Okay? Which makes a lot of sense. This electoral college is out of date. If y'all don't realize, the electoral college was born out of racism and bigotry. It's out of date. So Oregon is one of a few states who are saying that, hey, if you win the popular vote, you get our electoral college votes. That makes sense altogether. And this has nothing to do with that thing in the White House right now, but it makes no sense that the majority of the people will vote for a particular candidate, but because that candidate, that candidate has more votes than his opponent, but because his opponent got more electoral college votes, the opponent gets to be president. That's not the will of the people. If the majority rules, the majority rules. And if the majority voted for one candidate and the other candidate got the job because of the electoral college, there's something wrong with our voting system. So hats off to Oregon. Now, the last story I want to talk about, and the rest of the hour is going to be about an horrific picture that is floating around the internet. You all have seen it, just like I've seen it. Let me read some of this story to you. On Sunday, there was an emergency call about a woman who was in a desperate way down by the river. We heard the report and went down to the river, where she was shouting and screaming that the current had taken her daughter. Later, we found out her name was Vanessa Avalos. We could hear her telling the officials that they had been in Mexico for 2 months and wanted to ask for asylum in the U.S. She said they'd been in Tapachula in the south of Mexico, and they'd applied for a humanitarian visa allowing them to stay and work in Mexico for a year. But they wanted the American dream, so they took a bus up to the border. They arrived earlier that morning, and they went straight to the international bridge to ask for applying for asylum. But they were told the American Migration Office was closed because it was a weekend and that there are lots of people in line ahead of them. A few months ago, there were about 1,800 people waiting in Matamoros for an asylum interview. It's gone down to about 300 now, but there are only 3 interview slots each week. So they will still be looking at a long wait. So the family were walking back from the bridge when Martina stopped and looked at the river and said, "Here's where we cross. He crossed first with the little girl, and he left her on the American side. Then he turned back to get his wife, but the girl went into the water after him. When he went to save her, the current took them both. Someone called for rescue services. On this bank, there are always people jogging and riding bikes on the weekend. And the search went on until after 11 p.m., but even with boats and lamps, they couldn't be found. The next morning, they continued in the light of day, and about 10:15 in the morning, the firemen found the two bodies. That's when I took the pictures, before the scene was taped off. Now, that was the reporter taking those pictures. So here was a man who wanted to save his family, who wanted a better life for his family. And he decided to cross the Rio Grande. You know, this time of the year, the Rio Grande is very high. The current is very strong. There are places in the Rio Grande where you can literally walk across. But this time of the year, it's a little tougher. So when he put that child, and if you've seen this picture, and I'm going to describe it to you. I'm going to describe it to you because, see, I know what he did. He is laying face flat, face in the water, along with a child that is clearly has a diaper on. So that child couldn't have been no more than 2 or 3 years old. He is barefoot. She has shoes on. She is under his shirt with her arm draped across his back. Now here's what he did. When he got to her, he stuck her under his shirt so he could hang on to her. I've seen this before. And apparently he was overcome by the current. But this is what's happening on the American border. And when you have Republicans say stuff like, those kids don't need t-shirts, those kids don't need blankets, those people. We even had a United States congressman, a Republican the other day, said that if those people wanted to leave, they could leave anytime they wanted. That's a damn lie. These people are in concentration camps. They are dying in concentration camps. And even though it's not like the concentration camps of World War II, it's still a concentration camp. A rose by any other name is still a rose, and just as sweet, as Shakespeare once said. A concentration camp by any other name where people are dying, people are not able to eat, is still a concentration camp. And yes, you do have these people in concentration camps. And America ought to be ashamed. So I want to ask the question, where are the evangelicals on this? Where are y'all? Because, you know, y'all talk about the love of God. Y'all talk about how God loves children, how God commands you to do the same. But you all are the same people who are helping this president push this agenda. So I would surmise, or I would enter into the conversation to this. The next time a Republican candidate comes to your neighborhood meeting, comes to speak to you, and he dares to fix his mouth to say anything about God, you should get up and walk out. Because clearly the Republican Party doesn't give a damn about God. In fact, clearly the Republican Party doesn't even know who God is based on the scriptures. See, we could stop them from using, and you know, I would say this, because they're also, Donald Trump yesterday or the day before is now talking about trying to indoctrinate my children with a religious philosophy. Now, let me talk to all you black people who think there ought to be prayer in school. Because now Donald Trump is thinking that. So when there was prayer in school, let me tell you what was going on in America. These same white folks that were praying for you, they were part of the lynch mobs that were raiding jails and killing innocent black people. How many of those people that were killed in Elaine, Arkansas, up to 800 from what we understand, how many of the people who did the killing were Christians or white Christians? How many of those white Christians chased down John Carter and hung him from that pole on 9th and Broadway right here in Little Rock, and then burned his body and dragged his body up and down Broadway, and then dismembered him and was using his arm to direct traffic? How many of those were white Christians? I'm just asking a question. Because if those are Christians, I sure as hell don't want to be a Christian. But this thing about prayer in schools and religious doctrine in schools, if I want my child to have a religious doctrine, I'll send him to a religious school. But you know what? As a black person, I'm not going to send my child to a religious school, because that religious school is not going to teach him the facts about religion. So I'm not sending them to a religious school. So let's talk about public schools. We want to have prayer in schools, right? We want to have prayer in schools. Who's going to lead that prayer? Do you want the white teacher who don't like black students to lead that prayer? Do you want a white minister who is an evangelical who doesn't like black kids lead that prayer? And how long should the prayer be? But wait a minute, there's this little thing called the Constitution. That if you have a Christian prayer, then you need to have a Muslim prayer. Who's going to lead the Muslim prayer? Oh, you don't want prayer in schools now, right? You Christian folks. We saw this play out right here in Arkansas 2 summers ago. Remember when the religious group got the 10 Commandments on the state capitol grounds? Remember that? And I knew what was coming, because the reason I knew what was coming, because I know history and I know the Constitution. Sure enough, a satanic group said, wait a minute. Under the Constitution of the United States, we know that the state should not be the sponsor of any religion. And that includes Christianity. But since you're going to allow the 10 Commandments to be placed on the Capitol grounds, then we want a statue of Satan on the Capitol grounds. Y'all remember that? And all the black folks were up in arms. Oh, that's terrible. I saw the post. Oh, that's terrible. Well, what is our world coming to? You said that because you don't know the Constitution. There's a reason why the Constitution has a separation of church and state. See, what you all forget is, and when they make the argument that, well, you know, our religious leaders, our founding fathers they were Christian. Well, all you got to do is do a little Google search and you know that those men were not Christian. Number one, how could they be Christian and they owned slaves? George Washington owned 300 slaves. Thomas Jefferson owned 600 slaves and raped Sally Hemings on a regular basis. George Washington, do you know the teeth that because you know George Washington had false teeth, right? You know where he got those teeth from? They would pull them out of the mouths of slaves that he owned. So just by their actions, that would tell you that they weren't Christians. In fact, Ben Franklin was an atheist. Go do your research. Don't believe me. Just go do your research. So how could they be Christian? And by the way, why did they come to America? They came to America to escape religious persecution by King George. So if they were Christian, why didn't they stay in Europe? They didn't want King George to be fostering a religion on them. They wanted to go somewhere so they could be free and practice religion the way they saw fit. Whatever it was, like the Quakers. So when you start talking to me about religion and it being in schools, or how much you love the Lord, which, I judge a person by their actions. I judge a Christian by his or her actions. Hello? If you're running around espousing that you are Christian, then you should be living a Christian life. And what we know right now is that white people ain't living a Christian life. And if they ain't living a Christian life, they ain't Christians. You can quote any Bible verse you want. You know what? Satan knew the Bible as well. And for this to happen on American shores, but I'm not surprised. Because there are black men being murdered in the street, and we're seeing evidence with our own eyeballs. And these police are not getting convicted. In fact, white jurors are acquitting these people. How many of those white jurors are Christians? Remember the guy, and this story came out last week, that ended up going and he was chasing down the one of his patients, and he ended up getting shot while he was laying on the ground. And they just recently had the trial, and the jury foreman went up to him and said, "I'm sorry it ended in a mistrial. We did everything we could to get you off." Now wait a minute. Here was a man who was a caregiver, who had a patient to escape. He went out to get the patient. Someone apparently had called the police. The black man was laying on the ground, prone on his back, with his hands in the air, and the police officer shot him. In fact, from what I understand, he was shot at 3 times. He got hit once. Thank God it wasn't fatal. How is it that you can see that and hear that and say that police officer was innocent? These are white Christians. Now, had that been a black police officer, he'd have been in jail. He'd have been doing time. We know that. So this is our Christian nation. I hope you've seen this picture. If you haven't seen it, do yourself a favor and go look at it. And I want to thank the journalist for snapping this picture, as horrific as it may be. And boy, I'm going to tell you, it's horrific. It's terrible to look at. 2 people, a father and his daughter, face down on the shores of the Rio Grande River on the American side, dead from drowning. Don't talk to me about your Christian values, because you're living a lie, America. America was never born on Christian values. America has never been a Christian nation. And black people, you all need to quit falling for that mess, because that's how they disarm us. Let us pray together. No, I'm not going to pray with. Would you pray with the devil? If Satan showed up right now and you knew it was Satan, would you say, "Satan, give me your hand, let me pray with you"? I wouldn't. But then again, I'm not a Christian. We got to do better, folks. We cannot allow people to continue to manipulate us with religion. That story about those people in Uganda. And I've seen so many weird stories out of Africa where white evangelicals did some strange things. I saw another story where the ministers told all the women if they didn't have a man to line up, and he took them down to the beach, and he told them to get on their knees and line up, pull their underwear off, pull their dresses up, and he was going to go by and examine all of them. What kind of stupidity is that? You see, if you do your homework and you study, you will understand what I'm talking about. Some of you all are mad at me because I'm talking about Christianity. You don't understand. I'm not talking about Christianity. I'm talking about its application. And we've seen over and over and over again how the applications of religion. Look, Christians are not any different. Muhammad did the same thing. Muhammad did the same thing. Muhammad decided that, hey, look, either you're going to accept Islam or we're going to kill you or cut your tongues out. Don't get mad at me, my brothers and my Muslim brothers and sisters. This is history. Go read it. That's why Africa is a predominant Muslim nation. It's because those people were forced through history to become Muslims. That's why Ethiopia is still, and Mali are the only two Christian nations. I've told you this story. The Ethiopians decided that, hey, look, we're going to survive. So what we are going to do, we're going to espouse Islam during the daytime or when we're asked, but at night we're going to still pray to Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior. That's why Ethiopia is still Christian today. But it was a Christian nation that attacked Ethiopia and tried to destroy it, that has left Ethiopia in the dire straits that it is today. That Christian nation was Italy, where the Catholic Church is based. See, if you don't know your history, you won't understand what's going on in the world. But America, this is your stain. Donald Trump, this is your stain. And no matter how you try to deflect and blame stuff on Obama, no, my whomever you are, whatever you call yourself, this is your stain. And right now, if you have friends that are evangelical Christians, you need to look at them with the side eye. Don't trust them. They will stab you in the back. I'm just being real. Well, I'm being real every day. Don't trust them. All you got to do is look at their work. Just because they come in your neighborhood and give you turkeys on Thanksgiving, they're not coming in because they feel sorry for you. They're coming in to look down their noses at you. So then they can go back to their homes and their churches and laugh about, did you see that poor little black kid there? They're looking for validation to their lie. And we got to stop this. You got to stop it. I asked you the other day, your white friends, if you have them, have you asked them to watch When They See Us? How about inviting them over and having a watch party with When They See Us and have a conversation? If you go to a black church, because there are many of you out there who are black who go to white churches, have you asked your white minister, why don't we have a watch party for When They See Us? And let's have a real conversation about race in America. Have you asked your white minister? Your white friend that you go fishing with, have you asked him, yo man, have you seen When They See Us? Or ask him about the shootings that are continually going on in this country. Ask him about the Constitution. Does he believe all men are created equal and afforded all rights and privileges under the Constitution of the United States? And does that belief apply to black men and women? And if that belief does, are you going to march with me on this day at this time to protest against police brutality? I dare you to ask them. But you know, you're not going to ask because you're comfortable, aren't you? You don't want to make him uncomfortable. Yeah, that's part of the problem. We've got to get out of here. Hope you enjoyed the show. We'll be back tomorrow. It's called Black Focus Radio. Our issues, our solutions, our voices on joynetradio.com. Close.
You've been listening
Hey,
to Black Focus.
thank you all for listening.
Our issues with our
Appreciate it.
solutions and our voices. Join us every weekday afternoon at 1 p.m. on
So turn that off.
joynetradio.com.
End stream here.